Good evening. My name is Tracy Calabrese. I am the Associate Director of Donor Relations here at the New Bedford Whaling Museum, and I wanted to welcome you all to the second of our 2024 Portuguese Lusophone-world series featuring Katherine Vaz. The series, which was launched in 2021 thanks to the work of the Whaling Museum's Portuguese Advisory Committee, which is co-chaired by Gil Perry here in our front row and Onésimo Almeida, presents a wide range of topics and programs from Portuguese-speaking countries across the world, with particular focus on the specific interests of local communities with family ties to the Azores, Cabo Verde, Madeira, and mainland Portugal. Tonight's event is co-sponsored by the Department of Portuguese and Brazilian Studies at Brown University with support from FLAD, and funded in part by donations from a number of individual donors. We are so grateful for their support. I would also like to thank those in the room who purchased our $50 hero ticket. A part of your ticket purchase today goes right back into supporting this particular program, so thank you so much. I want to have a special welcome and thank you to Dr. Tiago Cabrita de Souza, the Consul of Portugal in New Bedford, and João Caixinha, Coordinator for the Portuguese Language Programs and Education Affairs in the United States, who are both in attendance here tonight. Thank you so much. And finally, I want to make sure to take a moment to thank our members that we appreciate so much for your commitment not only to the Whaling Museum, but to this program. It is always a good time to become a member of the Whaling Museum. It's never a bad time. It's free admission for a year, 50% off public programs like the one you're here at tonight, access to amazing members-only trips. We are going to Cabo Verde next year, so that's an exciting announcement we'll make later this year, and a special publication. So please join us, become a member if you are so interested. Right now, I'm excited to be joined by Katherine Vaz, a former Briggs-Copeland Fellow in fiction at Harvard and Radcliffe Institute Fellow. Katherine is the author of SAUDADE and MARIANA, which have been translated into 6 languages and named one of the top 30 international books by the US Library of Congress. Her story collections, Fado and Other Stories, and Our Lady of the Artichokes won the Drew Hines Literature Prize and Prairie Schooner Book Award, respectively. Her latest novel, Above the Salts, which she will be discussing here tonight, was published in 2023 and was People Magazine's Book of the Week and Good Morning America's top 3 pick. Vaz was named one of the top 50 Luso-Americans of the 20th century by Luso-Americano and was the first Portuguese-American to have her work recorded in the archives of the Library of Congress. Please welcome Katherine Vaz.
All right, the former teacher in me is going to invite, but not require, people to kind of fill in here, because what I hope to do is give about a half-an-hour presentation and then open it up for a discussion with you so we can have a little conversation. Anyway, invited but not required. There we go. And this happens to be someone I just met named John Alves, who is the protagonist of my novel. Not him, but someone named John Alves, so who has his roots in Madeira. So, and another proud Madeiran, I assume, and sitting right next to him. Okay, what I would like to do first is thank all of you for coming out on a rainy evening to spend some time with me and with one another. I also want to thank Jill Perry, right there, for doing a lot to set this up and having to drive me from the train station and really doing a lot to take care of my stay here. Also, Beatriz and Onésimo in absentia, I want to thank, and Andrew, Jennifer, Alex, and Emily, and Julie, and the staff here, and Tracy, for that lovely introduction. Thank you. And today I had the honor of meeting also the Consul General, Tiago Souza, and his wife, Catarina, and we had a lovely lunch with my old friend, João Caixinha, as well. And my pal, Daryl Caston, showed up, and he's also a wonderful Luso American writer who has a new edition of his book, The Undiscovered Island, out with Tagus, correct? And so you can buy that and read that too. Okay. I'm now going to do advanced technology to do what I hope is a nice presentation about the art of telling a story, how I came about writing Above the Salt. But what I really hope to talk about is some of my attitudes about life in general and how one, you know, we think of writing as a very solitary thing, which is also great, but it really is tapping into the world in a way that's surprising and fresh. And so I wanted to share some of my experiences. This book took me 15 years to do, so I know. And you will laugh when you see the picture of when I started and when I ended. Well, I mean, here I am now, so. This is the picture. Anyway, I also want to give a wonderful shout out to my publisher, you know, Flatiron Books at Macmillan, and Megan Lynch, my editor, and Ellen Levine, my agent at Trident Media. They were just, you know, with all the things you hear about publishing and things, they were just heroes and so on my side and helped me so much. And a real quick story about it is when I signed with Ellen Levine, she said, "Oh, I love this book, I'm going to represent you, but you're going to work for a year with this editor friend of mine." And I said, "Okay." And she sold it to Megan practically overnight. And Megan said, "I love this, I'm going to publish it, but we're going to work for a year to get it even better." So you think you know how to write, and then you are reminded that it really takes a lot of sharing. So I'm going to talk for about maybe 30 minutes, 35, and then would love to open it up to questions and discussion and whatever you want. My, okay. I love to start with this slide because I kept it on my desk, believe it or not, for 15 years. Oh, okay, my husband's not here, Chris Surf, he's not here, but he said, "You've been saying that for 2 years, so you have to say you've been working on it for 17, so really it's 17. Anyway, this is what I like to call the love story about writing my love story. At the heart of this is a love story between John Alves and someone he met in the Lincoln household. This is based on a true story. Not many people know it, including in the Portuguese American community and the Portuguese community. Probably they do in Madeira a little bit, which is based on a true fact that I'll get to in a moment. But I kept this on the desk to remind myself of my own background, which is my father was from the Azores, and he had this weird ability to think in color. And I'll give you an example. There was one time, and this is actually what helped me become a writer. I happened to have parents who were very supportive of this, of their children going into the arts, so I was very lucky. But my godmother's housekeeper locked herself out of the house in California, and I was sent to give her the key. And the neighbor had called my dad and said, "Mrs. Correa is sitting out there. I think she can't get into her house." So I said to my dad, "Why didn't she just go over to the neighbor and call us?" Now, obviously, this is before cell phones and what have you. And he said, "Well, she doesn't read or write English or Portuguese, and she can't identify numbers. They look strange to her. She doesn't know how to read numbers, so she can't dial a phone." And then my dad, out of nowhere, said, "I think maybe she thinks in color." So he made a placard of dots of color to correspond to police, fire department, what have you, and then he covered her phone dial with color. And I thought, what a wonderful language to have come up with. My dad would always come up with these wonderful things. And he said one day, "You know, there's not many people writing about being Portuguese in America, my generation or yours, so why don't you try it?" So that's where I came to with that. And also, the family nickname in the Azores for one branch of my family was Os Passarinhos, the little birds, because they would sing when they were hungry, and they would eat their music, and you know, it was to distract them, but it was also to signal the neighbors that they were hungry. So it was really to remind myself of what I came from and how to be inspired and how to look for a new language in the world. So I kept that on my desk. Now, Above the Salt is based on the true story of perhaps up to 2,000 people, maybe fewer, who were on the island of Madeira, and they were converted to Presbyterian by a Scottish missionary, and eventually violently driven off the island. And after 2 years of wandering and being in the tropics, they were adopted by Illinois at the time of Lincoln. They were taken in. It was an example of extraordinary American generosity. They were given free, they were penniless, they were given land, they were given homes, they were given jobs. One boy in particular I found in a newspaper article in the archives of the Library of Congress, and it was about someone named John Alves, who came back as an old man to the Lincoln household. He had been jailed with his mother, who was sentenced for heresy in Madeira, and he went on to talk about courting a woman in the Lincoln household before he joined the Union Army and lost track of her and wandered the West for decades. So when I read that, I thought, that has the sweep of a magnificent love story, and to actually have somebody who's overcome by a memory of someone he courted 60 years earlier was so tremendous to me. So this is, now you can see this is when I started, so this is 1999. And this is a wonderful Brazilian woman named Dr. Ieda Chiqueira Guiarda, who ran the Hispanic division at the Library of Congress. And she was a wonderful devil because she thought that there weren't enough Portuguese and Brazilian things in the Hispanic division, so she kept promoting things about me, which I was all for. And I gave a talk one day, and this is when my work was recorded, and she said, there's a really weird exhibit in the map room, you should see it. And it was like these maps of what they called the Portuguese Protestants of Illinois. So we both laughed at that, because why wouldn't you? And at that point, I thought, well, this is interesting. And I did go to Madeira and started poking around. And if we're doing this under the contours of a love story, it was so humid there, and the Bibliothèque Nationale was so dusty that I actually swooned in the library, and they were very nice about it, but I thought, oh, well, that's a great way to start a love story, by just fainting. And I came across this, believe it or not, in Madeira, in English, and it was about him talking about Mary de Freitas, courting Lincoln, sitting at his table, and with this woman, Mary. And I thought, this is just beyond belief, that you would sit down with Lincoln at his table. You were from a little tiny village in Madeira, and you were a baby in jail with your mother, and suddenly you're sitting at the table of someone they were already calling the great man. And I thought, this is an example of an ordinary life that is truly extraordinary. But what happens is, after he goes to the war, this is the kind of things writers do to, like, dress up their research when they're postponing actually getting to work. I didn't really know how to handle this love story, because ideas are great, but then you have to flesh them out. You have to do the steps of it. You have to write the sentences. So I didn't really know what it was, except for I couldn't figure out the blank year where he does not say what happened when he comes back from the war. He spends a year in Illinois. He says nothing about what happened, and suddenly he's wandering the West. So that is the canvas novelists love to find. And honestly, in real life, it's the same thing. You look for the blanks, not the facts you already know. You look, what's the blank there? What's the mystery? My godmother, who was from also the Azores, she said something, you know, Catherine, you can figure anything out if your mind is dirty enough. And I thought that was great advice. So I thought, what's happening in that blank? And that was my canvas. That little thing there was the canvas that I wanted to paint in. And it was a great puzzle. What did happen to him? So what happened was, I started to think about this person, and part of this interview was that when he went back to the Lincoln household as an old man, when the time came to sign the ledger, the guest book, Lincoln was long dead. His hand was shaking so much he couldn't write his name. And I thought, what kind of love story is this that 60 years after it, his hand is shaking so much he can't sign his name? And that, sometimes when we have a problem in life, or we're trying to figure something out, or we're trying to do something creative, or trying to do research in any field you happen to be in, we look for the facts, we look for proof. But sometimes it's a good idea, I think, to look for what is the feeling that happened. What is the feeling? What's the intensity of feeling? And for me, that was so extraordinary that I thought, I really want to explore that. And honestly, when you're writing on something for 15 years, I would go back to that feeling, trying to capture it when I just didn't even want to look at this project anymore at all. Let me go back 1 second. Yeah, so I started to do a little bit of research, and this was something from that he writes about wanting to get his pension renewed or something as an old man. And I thought, my feeling was I wanted to get into a feeling of who he was as a real person. Who are you? You tell me what the story's about. I don't want to just put you through a maze. And this was when I wrote a proposal. I actually moved from California to Cambridge when I was going to start working there at Harvard, and I got a year at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study. And I wrote a lot of really terrible stuff about this guy and his story and the Civil War and what have you. And I put everything in a box. I said, I hate all of this. I'm not going to do it. And I did a proposal anyway, just for the hell of it, and sent it to Radcliffe, and I got the gig. So I thought, oh, damn, now I have to do it. And I was moving boxes around in my new apartment in Cambridge, and the one with all this material exploded, and his picture was on top with the article and the interview, and I thought, okay, I get it. I mean, that was just like something right out of Magic Land. And what I did was I started working on it, and I still couldn't get the grasp of the love story. So I decided to write to the Veterans Administration and get his papers, which you can do. I thought I'd have to prove that I knew him, but they'll send anything to you. And that's a good example that you would be surprised how much people just want to talk and tell you about what they do, and to invite you in, to say, oh, sure, I called up a nurse once because I wanted some details for a short story I was doing. She was great. We sat down and I learned a lot. So we think of writing as just a separate thing that you do in a room, but it really is, let me discover. Writing is, I think, not just what do I know, it's let me find out what I don't know, or better yet, a lot of writers say, I want to write what I don't know about what I know. So that's always a good philosophy, too. And I was at Radcliffe Institute. I called a friend up and I said, oh, I can't. This is like trying to make a mountain out of sawdust. It's just, I don't know what to do with it. She said, Katherine, just go home. Tomorrow's another day. And as if by magic, it was waiting for me in the foyer of my apartment building. And I opened it, and the first thing I saw was his medical chart, where he was pretty much just naked in front of me. And he also said in that first letter that I showed you, I have no one to take care of me. So I thought, oh, okay, that just seems like a message from the beyond. So I was starting to get interested. You know, when I called my friend and I said, I don't know what to do with this guy, I sounded like a teenager. I don't know about this guy, you know. So now, here's the bump in the road. You know, you start getting to know someone. And then in his papers, I found that he had been court-martialed in the war. For about 20 days, he was incommunicado. He was punished for something. Now, I asked Drew Faust, was the head of the Radcliffe Institute at the time. I said, what did he do? Because she was a Civil War expert. She goes, I don't know, but I do know someone who could help you, but I want to warn you, this is a needle in a haystack. You're trying to look for one soldier, one private in one troop in Illinois for, you know, in 1 month in the Civil War. Forget it. I mean, you don't, but, you know, go poke around and, you know, the records are interesting. And I said, well, yeah, you know, I'm in DC, let's try it. So I walked in and I looked across the room and I said, Alan, because my friend Alan Taylor was there from California. And now it makes more sense for Alan Taylor to be in the old military records than it does Katherine Vaz, because he's won the Pulitzer twice for his history books, which are just wonderful. And he goes, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "You know, I'm looking to see what this guy did in the Civil War that got him in trouble." And he goes, you know, needle in a haystack, and I found out within 3 hours. And one of the happiest moments of my life is I picked it up, the document, and I went under Alan's nose, and I said, "Look what I found." And he said, he was very dry, and he said, "You going to come over to the dark side now," meaning being a historian? And I said, no. But I found it. And I will tell you, this is when I fell in love with John Alves completely, because what he did in the war that got him in trouble is really great. And if you've read the book, I put the truth in the book. And if you haven't read the book yet, you have to, because I'm not going to tell you what he did, right? I did that at the Ambassadors, and he goes, "That was really clever," so I'm doing it again. And here are the beautiful handwriting for the hilarious, wonderful thing that got him in trouble. So I just, you know, these things are tied up in pink ribbons, and they come out to you in these big conveyor, you know. Okay, so I had mentioned earlier the Lincoln Ledger. This is the guest book. And in the interview, this is where being a writer is a little bit like detective work, and it's this very human thing of you try to figure out who people are, and we have first impressions of people, but nobody really knows anyone. You know, we always say that we know ourselves better than anyone, but I think people sometimes have to tell me what I'm doing and what I'm like. I don't really know. You know, but it is verbatim the way he described it in the newspaper article that he gave the interview in. So I thought, he's an honest man with a very sharp memory. So this makes it all the more intense that he didn't say what happened in that blank year. But I thought, he's a truth teller, and he's somebody who's very emotional. So that helped me when I you know, started to think about not so much the plot, but who is he? Who is he, and who is this love, and what is it? There are not very many books on this. There are tons of books on the Civil War, as you know, and novels, certainly. But I can't think of one that's from the point of view of an immigrant, much less a Portuguese one. I mean, forget it. So I thought, honestly, this feels like I just wanted to make a contribution about my late father was so proud of his Azorean roots, and it kind of, he handed me a baton, more or less, to say, you know, see what you can do with this. Yeah, that's where he's talking. Someone named John Drinkwater, a playwright in England, happened to be in the house when John Alves had this very emotional moment, and John Drinkwater is the one who signed the book for him. Now, what are the odds? See, this is when then you start really getting into something. I think with a lot of artistic projects, we always hesitate, and it's like, I remember being a kid and getting at the top of it. Probably everyone's done it. In California, it's a rite of passage. You have to go up on the high dive and go to the end, and then you have to jump, and I froze. And then I thought, the only way out of this is to jump. So I always think of that as, when I'm writing something, just jump, you know, just jump. And I think it's a very good, people hesitate when they have some dream they want to do, or they have a project. Just put something down and see what formulates, because then the world starts to respond to you. It's interesting. It actually gives you things back. So what are the odds that Illinois College of Jacksonville, Illinois, would offer a visiting writer gig for a semester? And I thought, great, this is a paid research trip, and it was. And so I got the gig, and so I started going to all the Lincoln libraries, the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library, and It sounds kind of dry, but it was fun because I went in there and they were so glad that I wasn't somebody doing genealogy. Like my great-great-uncle was the third pallbearer Lincoln, and I want to look. They were so excited it was a novelist. They kept saying, let's run down to the vault and get things. And I said, well, I want to see the guest book. So they brought it up. That is from the actual guest book that they were so glad to bring up. And they said, well, you want to see Mary Todd Lincoln's cookbook? And I said, yeah, bring it up. And so they brought it up, and the dessert pages are stuck together from sugar, because she was a sugar addict. And I thought, this is the kind of thing you have to see, you have to feel, and you think, oh, I wouldn't have, that's so great, that's so great. So I made a scene with them sitting at the table, and they're eating cake. So that's a close-up of the book. And then you start really good. When I was in Springfield, Illinois, I leaned down to tie my shoes, and I came eye level in this very messy secondhand bookstore with something called the 1849 Businessman of Springfield, Illinois, which is possibly in competition for the dullest title in the world, except that the volume itself is hilarious, full of great names, occupations, the lives of people at the time, including someone named Mr. Greenleaf who ran a nursery. And I thought, that's where life is so much better than fiction, because if you named a nursery owner Greenleaf in your book, they think, oh gosh, you're lazy. But I think, it's like James Joyce once said, when you're really in the slipstream of something you love, or something, the writing is going well, or whatever you're doing, the words you can't quite put your finger on will blow to your feet on a piece of paper. And I thought that's what started to happen for me. So that's Madeiran. Now I took that with a kind of little Kodak camera, but you can see how British the design is as well. It's very terraced, but the colors. And I think you get into a feel for who the characters are by saying, what did they have to go through? You ask questions of them, because they went from that to that. That's Illinois. They were freezing. And it's flat. It's flat in Illinois. Anyway, the other thing that happened that was kind of fun is there was another library I was in, and I saw a nameplate that said Stephen Govea, and it was spelled Goveia. They left the U out. And I went up to him and I said, by any chance, are you a descendant of the Portuguese Protestants of Illinois? And he goes, I've been at this desk for 25 years. No one has ever asked me that. And he introduced me to all the people who were descendants in the area of that town still called Madeira Hill, or sometimes Portuguese Hill. So I thought, I'm pretty much what I think of as an extroverted introvert. So it just is a nice way of reaching out to people, and they kind of feed their sensibility into a story. And I think stories are enriched by finding others, and they feed into what you're doing. I really loved spending time with those descendants. They were so shocked someone wanted to talk to them, first of all. They gave me the old Bibles, which were great, just to see them, feel them. They had tons of newspaper clippings, thank you. These kind of going on a wonderful trail. This is the house of the, I know this sounds like an oxymoron, but the philanthropic banker, Augustus Ayres. This is his house that he built according to an Italianate model that he saw somewhere. And he was a very wealthy man who stopped a train once, got out, asked for the blueprints of a house he liked. The train, everyone on it had to wait. He got back on the train, and this is what he built in Illinois. The thing I found, this is a battle that's going on for the soul of the country to this day. Jacksonville, Illinois, called itself the Athens of the West, because they believed in taking care of the blind, the indigent, the deaf. They had one of the largest institutions for the deaf in the world. They believed in art galleries. They believed in education for women. Harriet Beecher Stowe's brother was the first president of Illinois College, and I thought they believed in community, that the spirit of a country is based on community, how you take care of each other. They weren't naive. These were cattle barons, these were bankers. This is what they were bankrolling. It's really phenomenal. Springfield, I'm generalizing, is more about politics, railroad. If you don't make it, you move on. We tend to think of America as very community-based, but I read a lot of things about that time that said, you know, if you didn't make it, you went to California where they were finding gold. You left your family behind. You had another family out west. What were left behind in Illinois were called gold widows and silver widows. This is now a bed and breakfast. Times change. And I'm going to go stay there in November because I'm doing some things in Illinois, which I have not been to since my book came out. This is the Institution for the Deaf, and you can see how massive it is. So I thought, what a great thing what profession shall I give my character? And this seemed so appropriate for somebody who, you know, would have known 2 languages, and what's the language of love? And to me, it felt like something beyond words. So I have him work there. They had a lot of wonderful inventions. See, there again, I just knocked on the door, and I said, may I look around? I'm possibly, you know, I'm doing a book that's based in Jacksonville, and they said, come on in. And they showed me all these great things. They showed me that they have an annual day where they take peanut shells and paint them as parrots to encourage the children, because parrots have only timpani for ears, which I thought was so wonderful. I thought, I have to use that detail. And this is Dr. Lawrence Zettler I met at Illinois College. He was kind of a mad scientist, and I ran into him, and he you know, I have something called miracle berries in the book, which, by the way, are real things. I didn't invent those are real things. You can get them on Amazon. They're great party favors. You chew them, you swallow them, and you bite into a lemon, and it tastes like candy. So I have my female character bring one from Madeira. It would have grown in Madeira because it's tropical. It would only grow in greenhouses in Illinois, but Florida is where they grow now. Anyway, I wanted to talk to somebody who was a botanist. So I ran into him, and he said, well, I don't know about that, but I'm making ghost orchid perfume. And I said, really? With what? I mean, ghost orchids, but where do you get them? He said, on the prairie here. So I thought, you're kidding. I never would have thought there are ghost orchids on the prairie of Illinois. So he said, let's go find some. So he found them. I probably stepped on a lot and didn't see them. But he found them. And this is like 2 years ago in London. He was at the, have you ever been to the Royal Horticultural Show in London, which is fabulous? Anyway, he had finished the perfume, and he wanted to give me a vial, and I had other reasons to be there, so I went and got it. I would love to tell you that it's the most exotic, unbelievable scent in the world, but it's kind of blah. This is an example of when you throw yourself into whatever, an artistic project, a relationship, a new adventure, you get people to surprise you. You get things you didn't expect. I don't think a writing project is successful if it goes completely to plan, if I follow it. I do outline things because otherwise I'd be a mess, but I always expect to keep changing that, opening it up to new ideas, or that to me is not, I haven't let it breathe enough. So this was the ghost orchid perfume. I also believe in honoring the dead, and this is perhaps part of my Azorean heritage as well. I sent flowers to his grave, by the way, which I just as a nice gesture. I'm going to write about your life, and you know, I want to give you this gesture. So I went to Vicksburg, where he was in the Battle of Vicksburg. Well, Vicksburg, those of you, how many of you are Civil War buffs? It was really kind of frightening. He was at Shiloh, and I did go there. Shiloh was a disaster of people just blowing each other to bits in peach orchards. and probably killing as many of their, friendly fire as the enemy. It took 2 days, and then they just said, okay, the Union won. I mean, it was just a massacre. And then Vicksburg was a starvation campaign. So I thought, it's like descending into madness, war-wise, that he did. He went from Shiloh to Vicksburg to something called Madeiran, which was a rehearsal for the March to the Sea. They burned a town to the ground. And I thought, what kind of thing did that do to him if he got burned out of his house in Madeira and he had to burn other people's houses? So you start getting to know a character and having him kind of talk back to you. So I'm much younger, but my husband and I went to Vicksburg. My husband did a lot of work for Sesame Street, and he did his own other show called Between the Lions, which is not on the air anymore, but it was based in Mississippi, where they did a lot of recordings because that had a very low literacy rate, and they funded a lot of what Chris did. So I went along, and I did my research, and he did his recordings. So that's at the Illinois Monument, and there is his name. And conveniently enough, when you're named Alves, you get to be at the top of the list usually. Right? Vaz, not so much. Not so much. Shiloh was very, very eerie because if you've been there, it was very hot when I was there, and I was by myself because Chris was recording, and I just got this really eerie feeling. You look out on a field that's very uneven, you think, there are tons of bodies under there. I mean, they didn't know what to do with the sheer amount of human weight in the war. So you go to these places. I think you have to go to the places. You have to feel what it feels like. You have to let life surprise you. There was a shed on the field in Shiloh, and I started to go toward it, and then something told me, don't go look in there. Just don't. I was afraid to. So I think there's a kind of embracing the story. So it's not just words on a page that writers do. You say, how do I make this alive? How do I make something alive? I believe in keeping, this is also maybe a little Portuguese thing, which I can say in this audience, because I kept talismans around me. In addition to that bird in color picture, I asked Bordens to send me the label if they, the soldiers, if you read their diaries, they loved Borden's condensed milk because it was so sweet. Remember how that tasted? It was like pudding. So they would, one soldier wrote something about eating 6 of them and getting a stomachache, and I thought, oh, I'll have a bunch of soldiers wandering around drunk on Bordens. That'll be fun. So they sent me this, and I kept this near my desk as well, just to say, he also was starving when he was growing up, John Alves, and then he was in the war, and those people were starving too. And then finally, you do the writing of things. I keep this. This is a very special painting to me it's very recognizable. It's the Arnolfini marriage, Van Eyck. But it told me, keep your characters in the foreground. Keep the symbols there, but subdued. And way, way, way in the back, I had actually an English professor who gave me this painting and said, keep this in mind as a philosophy. The author is seen in the mirror, way in the back, very tiny, and the passions of Christ around it, but you need kind of a microscope or an enlargement to see it. So as a writer, you put things in buried under the surface that someone may not see or understand or perceive, but there's something that gives it a richness that adds to the depth of what you're doing. So we think of writing as a very linear thing, but it really is more like painting or sculpture. In painting, you know how to make a shadow. In writing, this reminded me, put the shadows in. Don't worry about what people necessarily see or there. Like here, get this. This is, you can just put it there and let it alone. One of the things I learned is when I was in the editing process of writing was, you know, my editor said something wonderful. She said, "We don't need to know everything you know." And I knew exactly what she meant. There's a certain confidence in knowing what to let go, that just a little bit can go a long way. Now, the book is pretty long, and it's pretty, you know, it has a lot of imagery, but my proudest letters that I received from readers were the ones that said, "Oh, your book's very poetic, it reads like poetry, but I loved the plot, and I kept reading, and I was really surprised at some of the things that happened. There were these twists and turns I didn't expect," and that to me was a real victory, because I worked very, very hard to do that. There's certain things that you keep, it was fun to discover. I cut a lot. My editor said, "We know war is hell. I don't need their battle positions. I cut the war scenes in half." And I thought, she said, "Tell us what we don't know." And one of the things that I found out, and this is gruesome, is that at Shiloh, they were in woods. They were in dense sites, so the animals would come out and eat the dead and the dying. And there was a practice of scavenging after a battle. People would come and, you know, strip the corpses of valuables, including gold teeth. So I thought, that's pretty awful. But that's enough to just say what Shiloh was like. So it's much shorter. And I've been told, actually, that I wrote the war scenes really well. And so I thought that made me feel good, because it's gruesome stuff. I came across this, and if you've read the book, there is I came across this when I already had the Victrola at the end of my book. I had the birds, I had the forests, I had this. It just was another picture that came to greet me, and I kept it near my manuscript just to say, "Oh, look, the world gave me something back that looks like," this was not the cover, but, and that's me after reading the book aloud twice to catch any errors. And my husband took this picture, and I thought it was very funny, because this is in our library in New York City. And I thought, okay, you compare that to the fresh-faced person who was at the Library of Congress. And this is actually in Évora in Portugal. And, you know, obviously in English, everything is a story, which was the other wonderful thing that kept me going. I did cut a lot from the book. There were a large number of the Portuguese Protestants of Illinois who went into entertainment business. There was one man who was the grandfather of the actress Mary Astor. So those of you who are older will appreciate that. There was one descendant of them who helped map out a lot of Beverly Hills, and he helped build Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks' house. So I put him in, because who could resist that? But I was necessarily strict with myself. So to conclude, I think, I don't have my clock in front of me. How are we doing on time? 45? Okay, so maybe I should open up questions rather than reading a passage. So that we've got about 15 more minutes, so happy to open up to questions, and thank you for listening. I know Maggie. She was in my group in Disquiet in Lisbon. Oh. But no pressure, Maggie. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing the process story, which was fascinating. And I knew nothing about the Portuguese in Illinois. And I think I'm asking a question that a lot of people must be wondering in the room, like, what did he get court-martialed for?
You have to read. I accurately tell you in the book. No spoilers. Yeah, there you go. Thank you. Yeah, no, it's hilarious. I fell in love with him when he did that. And see, this is like, you know, the when I'm collapsed, it's like, it was like a long marriage. You know, it's wonderful and beautiful, and I'm very happy with Chris. And, you know, it doesn't mean every day is great, though. So, so that's the long writing process. Well, I'm turning my phone off. Surprise, it's a marketing call. I finished my first screenplay based on one of my stories under the mentorship of someone named Robin Swicord, who did Practical Magic and I'm drawing a blank, but she's The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. It's one of hers. And she read my screenplay and invited me to be in a workshop. And so it's a different form for me, and it's just interesting to try and break form. My novel, Mariana, is being developed as a screenplay by somebody else who's an expert at it, which I'm very happy about. She's a woman named Sandy Welch who does a lot for the BBC. Like, she did the Emma that has Johnny Lee Miller, which what could go wrong, right? And Jane Austen. And Jane Austen Book Club is Robin Swicord. But I'm also starting on my next novel, and I'm working with the young guy who's an editor who I work with on this book, and just from the get-go with him. Because he's really wonderful. I haven't met him. He lives with his family in North Carolina, but he's really tough. He's fast, and he's tough, and he said, he'll write, you know, meh in the, you know, margin. He'll say, oh God, Catherine, this was like marching 10 miles just to step on a twig. You know, I love him, and he knows I'm tough enough to take it, so but then he'll write something like, oh, this is great, and I think it means something with him. So I'm working with him on my next book, which is, I guess the elevator pitch of it is Elena Ferrante in the San Joaquin Valley.
I had two questions.
They've invited me to come to a festival. I mean, I know it's not Madeira's proudest moment, but I have a great love of the island and the culture, and the people who were descendants were very, very proud of that. And I did meet in Philadelphia a woman whose great-grandfather was one of the Portuguese Protestants of Illinois, and she was telling me stories about he would run a hose. I wish I'd met her before I did the book, but she was a book buyer. And she wrote to me astonished, and she said she identifies more as she converted to Judaism and identifies more as that. You would not know from her name that she's Portuguese descent. And she said he would run, I remember him, he would run a garden hose out of the house with the wine he had just made so that the men didn't have to get up and go in the house for it. And I said, oh my God, that just sounds like, you know, what I remember in California. We didn't have a hose coming through the thing. My grandfather, during the, you know, Prohibition, would make it and sell it to his friends because why wouldn't you? This is it, so that was really, really fun and really it's gratifying to most of the letters come from people who are not of Portuguese descent or just happy to know about some of these stories that we have as Americans.
And my second question was, those of us who are descendants of Portuguese, culturally, do we have an identity that you could capsulize for us?
I think that that's a dangerous game to play because people are individuals. And, you know, when I say something like, for example, okay, my grandmother gave me a figa and I kept it and you know, my dad said he once did that behind his back and something fell off the shelf. And if I say something like that, you would say, oh my God, I remember something like that. So we have things in common, but when you start saying what are the characteristics of a people, I think you start getting into trouble. I think everyone can feel saudade, but the bride of the Portuguese is, but we have a word for it. So that's a difference. So there's a kind of melancholy. I mean, if you had, you know, ancestors from the Azores or Madeira or Portugal, that matter, your children grew up to leave home. They, like Ireland. I mean, there were no jobs. So it's the culture of how do you hold on to people? How do you, you know, do you start saying goodbye before someone's even left? I mean, I think you can talk about things that we might have like that. You know, we can describe things like that. But if you start putting words on it, someone will instantly prove you wrong.
So first of all, let me thank you for validating something my dad, who may he rest in peace, always told us that Mariasta was Portuguese. And like,
Yes.
so
Yes.
I can't believe 40 years later you're validating that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You were right.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, and maybe the book goes into this, so if that's the case, I'm very much looking forward to reading it. But did people in Illinois, besides the folks who brought the folks over, I mean, was there discrimination? Was there
Sure.
Is there very exotic?
Sure.
People? So is there a story there? Is it in the book, or can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, because Jacksonville, for all its progressiveness, it was part of the Underground Railroad. It had a strong abolition. I mean, they brought the Portuguese Protestants into Jacksonville and Springfield as charity, as a loving generosity, but also they were a voting bloc for Lincoln because they were abolitionists, and they were not Catholics. I mean, they went from an environment, say, of, you know, discrimination in Madeira against Protestants to an environment of discrimination against Catholics. So it's the world being crazy everywhere. But yes, there was, you know, they were foreigners, they were different, they were, Jacksonville was divided into sections. You had Little Africa, you had the Patch with the Irish, you had College Hill with the really rich people and Illinois College and the people who knew Lincoln, and then you had Madeira Hill. So segmented, but it was part of that experiment of trying to build community. And I think, you know, there were problems. This book, this woman who was the book buyer I met, whose grandfather ran the hose with the wine out of the house, said that her father did, her great-grandfather did, grandfather did experience a lot of that, and it did make him somewhat bitter. And he turned to communism and was never hired, so that made him even more bitter. So, sure is the proper answer, yeah. But they were also the people I met who were descendants were very, very proud of what they came from as being an unusual group of people, and part of the American tapestry. So problems, but I give Jacksonville a lot of credit for doing this incredible human experiment of trying to bring in diverse people and living together and taking care of one another. So I give them a lot of credit for that. And educating women. Jacksonville Female Academy was also known as the jail for angels. And there's not a lot about that in the book because at one point you have to tell a story and not just do research. But your dad was right, bless his heart.
Thank you for your presentation. Would you talk about the title of the book, Above the Salt?
Sure. That is something I will give away. It's explained in a passage at the Lincoln household. I didn't know what to do for the title. I had written a book of poetry with a Portuguese artist, and I gave away the title I really liked, which was The Heart is a Drowning Object, and I wanted to use that, and she didn't want to let go of it on our mutual project. So Above the Salt is an expression that's not Portuguese exclusively at all. It's a general expression of the time that means if you are invited to the house of someone prominent and you're in salt and pepper shakers are in the middle of a table, if you're invited above the salt, it means you are elevated to being counted as one of them. So that's when it's meaning, but I wasn't sure I loved it, and my editor said, oh, I do. I like, because it's like water, tears, sweat, you know, the whole, so I can see the boats coming. And when I, let's go back to the cover. You know, when I saw the cover, I thought it was so beautiful that that's when I fell in love with the cover, with the title, I mean. But that's the meaning, with various metaphorical things I can attach to it. If that's the last question, if you'll indulge me, and just I'll read 4 lines as a tribute to my own father, who died 11 years ago and was kind of the one who got me started with writing stories about the Portuguese in America. And this is when my character Mary and her father, who I named August in the book because that's my father's name, they leave New York for the Midwest for health reasons. And this is my tribute to my roots, which are California. Now I'm very happy living in New York. But when the steamship's wake sent out froth, Mary's heart erupted with frazzle cracks from an abiding worship of New York. And farther west, onward, there was gold right out of crevices. She had heard Illinois was very cold and extremely flat. Perhaps the winds there were like curtains that blew all the way to California and dipped into the Pacific, where the gold had run off in rivulets. And then the curtains, made of wind, blew back to the center of the country, brushing gold upon everyone's head. Thank you all very much. Oh, I'm happy to sign books will be for sale, and I'm very happy to sign them for you, and we can enjoy the reception now.
Oh, you took all the words out of that.